I'm going to be on a bit of a soapbox here. Not as big of a one as I thought I was going to be when I first watched the episode, because I rewatched it about an hour or two ago. And it's knocked a few feet off of my soapbox, but it's still going to be a fairly long and large soapbox, so bear with me. I said last week that this was going to be a very important episode, and that if an episode that's not written by Chibnall has the same issues as the last few episodes have, then I'm hitting that protest button and or the panic button. And the reviews have been very, very positive. I've seen where it's like masterpiece and knockout episode, 10 out of 10, all these sorts of superlatives, and all I keep thinking about is, if this is what we're gonna get as far as better, then I am hitting that panic button, because this was not any better than any of the Chibnall episodes. I think people are so hopeful that this narrative that I've helped to create in my own way, that as soon as Chibnall gives the reins over to another writer, it's going to be better. I think people really wanted that to be true, and it was not true. In many cases, this episode was worse. There were a couple moments that shine, but I think we're going to be in for a very long, dull, and dreary season. And with that, I get off my soapbox.
Okay. Wow. The bits of that I could hear when you weren't cutting out, or when your volume didn't get so loud that my ears hurt, were very passionate and very negative. So this is the moment where this becomes the most interesting Doctor Who discussion we've ever had, because I'm leaning towards giving this episode a 9 out of 10.
Yeah, we're going to have the same conversation we had in Series 10, the second to last episode, when I was like, if you loved that episode, what are you going to do with an episode that was actually good? And then the next episode was actually good. My favorite part of this week was watching the preview trailer for next week, because next week's episode looks good. And I'm just gonna call it. I think give this episode a year or so, and it's not gonna have nearly the reaction so favorable that I had this when it immediately came out. Because I'm sticking to it. I think that people are so desperate to see a good episode that's not written by Chibnall to kind of confirm their priors, that they're gonna rush to herald this one as great when it's not.
Well, I legitimately felt like it was a well-constructed, excellent episode. So I do immediately see, so it's not a perfect episode, it's not a 10 out of 10. For me, a lot of it was I was debating over in my head what score I would give it. And what I realized, as I was saying before this, the only way these have any meaning is if there's some kind of consistency between the scores. And I gave Rosa an 8 out of 10. And I gave the previous episode a 7.5 out of 10. And I was just like, this is at least a full point better than both of those episodes.
Before the rewatch, I was leaning 3 or 4. After the rewatch, we'll see. It's going to be a little bit higher than that.
3 or 4? I'm sorry, there's no conceivable way that this is a 3 or 4. 3 or 4 is like... 3 or 4 is like In the Forest of the Night. I give a 3 or 4, maybe a 2.
Yes.
Like, that's absurd. I'm sorry. I cannot take you seriously while you're arguing this is a 3 or 4.
I disagree. I think that... So, one of the great things about Doctor Who that I can always come back to is, even if an episode is bad, the acting's always really great. Like Andrew Garfield in that Bad Daleks New York episode, he had a great performance, and usually I can hold on to those. This probably had the worst acting in any New Who episode that I've seen. Like, even in the Slitheen episode, it was kind of a charm. There was like a charm to the performance of those actors. This was dull and boring and deadpan, and I never felt any emotion out of any of the characters. like including the main cast.
So I will say the one, I don't feel like that in general. I did feel like Prim was quite was not a very good actor, or he didn't do a very good job performing his lines. Other than that, I didn't have any serious issues. Apart from, I mean, Ryan, but I've complained about Ryan so much already that that's just kind of beating a dead horse.
Yes. Well, it's funny because Prem was like number one on that list for me, and then I rewatched it, and I felt like after the rewatch that there was just more of like a subtlety to his performance. I didn't really like it still, but I liked it a bit better. I'm blanking on the name of Yaz's Nana,
Umbrian?
but both actresses that played her Nana, the younger and the older version, were terrible.
I thought she was really good. I liked her. So.
Yeah, I thought I never bought in either watch of the episode. I never bought that she was in love with Prem. That
Really?
whole speech she has about how much Prem means to her. I wrote down in my notes, really? I don't think so, when she said something like I need him or whatever she said.
Really? Okay, I
Did
don't
not feel it.
know. Yeah, that's one of those cases of I'm just like, I'm not having difficulty mentally digging up a reason for, I'm having difficulty mentally digging up a reason for how, like, to be like, she definitely loves him. But it's like one of those cases of I didn't think this would be something we'd be debating, so I didn't take notes on that. Yeah.
Well, acting is a bit different than writing, because
Yes.
in writing you can actually point to specific things. With
In
acting, it's
the
a lot more
writing, there
subjective.
are definitely scenes written where she shows that she loves Prem.
Yeah, I mean, it's not. Well, I have a lot of issues with dialogue, but in those specific scenes, it wasn't dialogue or writing. It was the delivery. It just seemed like a line reading. And just overall, didn't seem like there was any emotion out of any of the characters. Like when the demon/aliens show up, it was like a really understated amount of like shock and surprise, even out of the characters who hadn't seen them before.
I do. So I do think there was something off in some of the performances. I am wondering if it comes down to directing or to the environment where they were shooting, because I know this is one of the location shoots, so it may have been incredibly hot or something, and nobody was 100%. Because it was a sort of oddly systematic, like there were lots of things that weren't quite working, but for me it wasn't enough to throw off the episode. It just takes it down a little tiny notch from where it could have been if everyone had been sort of firing on all cylinders.
I'm more of the opposite. Like with the ghost, I can never remember the name of that one. The Ghost Monuments. I said something like, there's lots of flaws in it, and I'm gonna choose to look past those flaws because I see a bigger picture. And now it's all crumbling around me, and that bigger picture that I thought I was seeing, I'm not seeing, and it's just the flaws, and there's no high notes. Like I was more optimistic because there was like there's plenty of time. I see what he's setting up. I can see this going places, and it's not going anywhere. I mean, I started off on the acting, but my major thing is the characters are not going anywhere. We got a whole episode on Yaz's family, and she's not developing at all. The companions are just asking questions again and pointing out the obvious. Like you mentioned, Ryan even worse
Did
this
nothing.
episode than with
It
Chibnall.
was
Ryan did nothing.
They could have left Ryan in the TARDIS, and it would have made no difference. But
exactly. And Graham had a moment with Yaz, which I liked,
loved that
but
scene.
he was kind of sidelined.
I feel like Graham still works though, because when you sideline Graham, Bradley Walsh has enough natural charisma and enough instinct about how to deliver his lines, and enough character written into them that he still works when he's in the background. But the moment any of the other characters go into the background, they just start asking questions and doing nothing.
Yeah, Graham's the least of this episode's problems, I
Okay.
would say.
To be honest, when this started, I thought this was going to be one of the most interesting Doctor Who discussions. I'm actually now thinking this is probably going to be the most boring discussion we have.
Because it's going to be me complaining, and then you being like, well, I can sort of see
No,
but not really.
it's going to be me being like, I don't understand what you're talking about a lot of the time.
Well, I'm not. I don't understand what other people are seeing in this episode.
What I'm seeing in this episode is an episode that does a much better job of engaging with history than Rosa does, for starters. Because with Rosa, it was sort of a case of how do you tell a story about Rosa Parks in Doctor Who and have it work? And it did it as well as it could have, which is I think what we concluded. There's no way that you could have done a better job story outline wise with a Rosa Parks episode. But it's just like, why did you try to do a Rosa Parks episode? Whereas this picked a much better subject for history, rather than trying to do it about a celebrity, about a person who specifically exists in history. It is a personal, character drama set against the background of India partition.
But they still wrote themselves into the hole of they can't do anything to alter the timeline. Like, that was my whole thing with Rosa, was why do you pick a known character? Because you can't change that. And they do it all over again here. It's the same thing as Rosa.
No, but the thing is, in Rosa, it was a disadvantage because it literally leaves the characters with nothing to do. Here it forms a source of tension because there is a thing that they want to do. They want to save Prem, and they can't save Prem because history says he dies, and if they change that, then there's an actual consequence of Yaz will no longer exist. So this tragedy has to happen.
That's the same thing as Rosa. Like, they have to let Rosa Parks happen in Rosa, even though they would want to help her. It's the same thing. It's not any different.
I think it's very different. Because the difference is that Rosa Parks, the entire moment is... it's about Rosa. It ultimately ends up as a positive thing for Rosa Parks, in that this is a statement that she's actually making, that she's trying to make. And I didn't really buy that much the episode trying to make it a tragedy that they couldn't move up a seat and let her not get arrested, because the entire thing was she was trying to make a stand for equality, and she couldn't have done that if they'd done this. Whereas Prem's death benefited nobody. Prem didn't want to die. Like, Prem just gets shot because that has to happen for Yaz to be born. I think that this is sort of a tragedy in the it's a much more tragic storyline in that they can't avoid they can't save him, and they have to let events take their course. No matter how much they wish they could.
I think this was another case of give me 60 seconds and I can rewrite this plot better. Why didn't the Doctor have a moment where she's like, you know what, screw this, I'm gonna beat the timeline, I'm gonna change history, I'm gonna save Prem, I'm gonna make it so that your Nana was wrong, or she was lying to you, that her husband was Hindu this whole time, and we're gonna save Prem and bring him back, and then she finds out she can't alter history and he dies anyway. That's a lot more tragic, and it's a lot more Doctor Who. This didn't feel like Doctor Who. It felt like a average character drama with a TARDIS. Like, it was, there's no wonder, there's no excitement, there's no adventure. It's dull. And I say dull in, like, you know, the way King's Speech is dull. There's not any, like, magic or muchness to it, to use one of my favorite words.
To provide a contrary point of view, I felt like the assassins, whose names I can't remember because there was just a sound.
Yeah,
I felt like they were great. I really liked them. They had a brilliant design, and also they did a good job of setting up the episode in such a way that you think it's going to be a standard sort of New Who kind of Doctor Who historical, where they go to a place and there are aliens interfering. And then it turns out that the aliens are not really involved in events. And I really love the concept of that these aliens used to be assassins, and now they're just and now they're standing vigil for people who've died when they were alone. It's sort of an interesting concept, and I think it does a good job of linking the aliens into the episodes without being like the aliens are responsible for partition somehow, or making the aliens like an awkward metaphor for partition, and also not making them completely extraneous.
I like the aliens. I like the twist that they weren't, going to try and kill people, that they were actually trying to honor the dead. But the episode cheated. It didn't work. The music when they first play is kind of a minor cheat, where it plays the scary psycho music. I feel like that's kind of half cheating.
That's not even
but
slightly cheating. That's absurd.
I don't know. But the main cheat here is the line about "we will stand over your corpses if you don't get out of our way," which makes it seem like that they're violent and killers. Like, I for a moment I thought I got the line wrong, and that it was actually hinting at like an arc, like the doctor's gonna die soon, and gonna die alone, and they're gonna have to stand over her. But no, they just threatened her.
Wasn't that right after
she wouldn't mess with the timeline?
Wasn't that right after she'd stolen their sacred like essentially religious the remains of their home?
Yeah, they're
like literally, if someone steals the remains of your home, you have a right to tell them you will stand over their corpses. That doesn't make you a bad guy.
Yeah, but I think that would have been the time to say we're not what we used to be, rather than we're gonna kill you. I don't know. It didn't seem like it felt like it could have been more elegantly done. But again, that's kind of a minor thing. I have a lot bigger problems with it. Overall, I feel like the aliens worked. I liked their story. I liked the conspiracy theory that it was the Stenza that blew up their planet, but again, that would mean the Stenza are going to come back and they weren't the best.
I have no interest in the Stenza being the ones who blew up their planet. I have no interest in the Stenza at all.
Well, okay, I don't like the interest in the Stenza, but I feel like if that's what they're going to do, I think that's a clever little, hint. If this is going to be an arc, that's a clever way to
it feels to me like
a
Russell T Davies type arc, which I don't really like, where it just comes down to occasionally mentioning something in the background, and then at the end being like, oh, look, all of these words that I keep saying were connected. Ooh, plot arc, which just feels boring to me.
Right. Bad Wolf.
Yeah.
Bad Wolf.
It's like it kind of worked with Bad Wolf, but every time he did it after that, I was just like, please stop. Don't do that. Don't. It's just like his arcs never really develops beyond that. It never develops beyond I occasionally mention a thing, and then at the end I tell you what the thing is. Whereas even when Stephen Moffat's arcs fell on their face, they were trying to be interesting story arcs.
I'm just kind of desperate to find an arc, not even like a story or villain arc, but an arc. Like, as I kind of said at the start, how is Yaz any different or changed now? Do we know anything about her as a person that we didn't already?
I do agree with that's one of the issues, where I don't think, here's the thing, that I don't think it would be necessarily an issue if the other episodes were doing their job of developing Yaz as a character. It's the fact that this episode also doesn't, but none of the previous ones did.
Well, my thought is that if you want to help blame Chibnall, I'm all game for that. But this is probably a sign that we're never going to get a good character episode, because Chibnall probably doesn't know what these characters are like, and the poor guest writers are just screwed.
The problem is that the episodes developing the central characters are usually given to the main writer. And the main writer at this point is someone who is best suited for writing filler episodes. So there's not really any. So it's going to be difficult to get any sort of determination of how the characters are working, because the guest writers are going to sort of have to do the developing of the characters by themselves. And I felt like Yaz was a good character in this episode. She had an interesting dilemma. It's just it didn't necessarily provide us with significantly more information about her character than we had before. Though we know more about her family background I got a slightly better sense of who she was. I want an episode that does do a better job developing Yaz as a character rather than just by her background.
Well, I'll put it this way. We've had 2 episodes now devoted entirely to the family of what I don't even think is supposed to be the main companion, and she's still the least fleshed out. Well, Ryan might have actually taken that spot now. Yeah, but she's still not fleshed out. And Ryan was worse, like measurably worse in this episode, and it blows a hole in my whole, oh, as soon as a good writer takes over, the characters are going to be fine and pop off the screen. No, it's I was an idiot. I was completely getting it backwards. The characters are nothing, and Chibnall doesn't have a plan with them. The guest writers don't have anything to work with.
So my big thing is I think the issues in terms of writing the companions come from Chibnall not having a clear sense of who these people are. And so the writer for this episode was just put Ryan in the background. But the problem is that Tosin Cole is not a good enough actor to handle being in the background. Like, he's just...
Yeah.
He just can't... he can't make small parts interesting. Whereas Bradley Walsh can, but Tosin Cole just can't make small parts interesting. So, if you would like me to talk about one minor issue I had here... Well, the funny thing is, so the writer of this episode is a playwright, and I really felt that as I was watching it, in that a lot of the ways in which it is good and the ways in which I love it come from it's very similar, it's very play-like, in that it's a few characters in a sort of small setting. There's lots of, I like the dialogue, I like the characters, people are well developed. There's it sort of comes down to a lot of people talking and a lot of sort of discussions between people rather than action scenes. But the way in which it doesn't work for me is that there are several scenes where they talk about I heard gangs earlier, and I heard gunfire in the valleys last night, and I'm just like, this is television, not a play. So what you should do is, instead of having a character say, I heard guns in the valleys last night, or she's just like, I went outside earlier and I heard gunfire, why not have a scene of her going outside, just silence, and then it's like gunfire in the distance? That gives a much better sense of the imminence of violence than her saying that she heard gunfire.
Yeah, there was a good deal of telling instead of showing. There was a good deal... I'm surprised he's a playwright, because I thought the dialogue was not good. There was a good deal of characters saying what's happening, which I guess is sort of a playwright thing, and a good deal of characters saying what they feel.
I felt like Graham's line about none of us know the story. None of us know the story of who. None of us know who the something about our lives because we're too busy living it from the inside. Was probably one of the more interesting lines that has been said. Probably the most interesting line that's been said in Doctor Who this season by far.
Maybe that seems kind of cookie cutter. I did really like one line about how we didn't change when the border was drawn.
Yes.
And the other one says, no, we did, or something. Yeah, that was a good line. But in particular, this episode lost me in the opening scene. I thought that the opening scene, which might have been a flashback and might have not, it was very confusing. With Yaz and Hernana.
I felt like it was a flashback.
I think so too, but it wasn't clear. But that scene was so stilted in both the dialogue and the delivery.
Really? I felt like even from the first scene, I was just like, this is so much better than Chibnall. Like little lines about the line about the store-bought cake, line about the when she's just like my favorite granddaughter. Sort of, I was like, there's more character coming through here than Chibnall is capable of, on any day.
It was half the way it was written, half the way it was performed. I didn't like the actress playing the Nana at all. But the dialogue seemed very I don't want to say amateur, but just generic, really, for that scene. I had some things more specific, and I've lost it for something in that scene that really took me out of it. Anyway, I feel like it's kind of hard to go back and forth on an episode when it's like dialogue, delivery, and acting because kind of as I was saying earlier, it's not really something you can go back to and like point at specific stuff. Like we usually take it from a more writing based angle, and not even like dialogue, but it's usually more like plot points and all that, story arc. And
Yes.
if we were
Yeah.
to if we were to talk about that, I think we'd mostly agree. I feel like there was a lot more potential for drama in the story than we got, but like there was a
Mm.
story. Like,
Yeah, there was a story. It was well structured. Do you agree with my points about like it was a better idea for a setting than the Rosa Parks?
ish, like it was a better idea to have it be not a known person because you can do anything with it. It was a terrible idea to write yourself into the same hole as Rosa. I know they weren't probably talking, but it was the same hole writing wise. And again, like Rosa, it cut a lot of the drama. Like, yeah,
It's funny
I
because
don't know.
I'm having difficult. I feel like there would be. I feel like a lot of the drama in the finale comes from the fact that they can't save Prem, even though they want to.
I, it might just kind of be down to taste, or it might be down to we just kind of saw basically the same thing a couple of weeks ago, but I was like, yeah,
Mm.
we were told he was gonna die and he died, and it was in that cliche top of my pet peeves list way of go off, go without me, I'll hold him off. Like you couldn't think of anything more original than that. We've seen that 100 times.
Mm. I'm kind of like I feel like that's a thing that happens.
It's a thing that happens. I mean, it
I'd
wasn't.
have I'd have difficulty seeing it working any other. I'd have difficulty seeing any other way to structure it in such a way that she gets away while he doesn't.
Well, I mean, I don't think I would have structured it uh, to write myself into that hole. As far as writing myself out of it, I personally would not have settled for that. I would have, unless I was really coming up on like a deadline, I would not. I would just have rewritten it, because it. I mean, if you have to resort to something that's that not contrived, but that cliched, I think you're in trouble from a writing perspective.
I see. This is going to be one of those cases. I think there are several things where I've heard you complain that they're cliched,
Mm-hmm.
and I really disagree. The other one being you often complain about last minute saves where a character comes out of nowhere and saves another character.
Oh yeah, that's my number
And
one
I'm just
pet
like,
peeve.
I don't see any issue with it. That's just that's how you write a dramatically tense scene.
Oh yeah,
I think when you write something that doesn't, when you're writing a script, you're just like, all right, this doesn't have any massive cliches in it. This doesn't have any conventional tropes that we've seen before. There's a chance that you've written some sort of experimental genius that's like a completely original story, but there's a much larger chance you've written something that has absolutely no drama in it.
well, okay. I think this will explain it. So for both cases, the go I'll hold him off case and the my biggest pet peeve of someone comes out of nowhere to save him. Uh, the problem is that there's nothing clever. Like the coolest kind of an ending is when you set something up and then you get the reader or the viewer to forget about it, and then when it looks like all hope is lost, that thing you set up comes in at the end, and that's what gets them out of the situation. Or sometimes you can still do it with a dark ending, and
Mm.
the there's nothing clever. There's no like that's what Doctor Who's all about. That clever twist at the end that saves the day, or maybe there's one person that dies, and that's been missing this entire season. It's not just this
Well,
episode.
the issue for me is I think that this episode worked perfectly at what it was trying to do. And I don't think this is the kind of episode where you give it a clever twist ending like that. And I felt like this is a kind of episode where the end scene, you know how it's going to end even as it's happening,
Mm-hmm.
and the tragedy is in sort of watching it unfold and like the quiet sort of like the quiet way it's played of him going out to confront his brother.
Well, what about this? What if he, had gone out to confront them, and they said, well, we're on horses, we're going to catch them anyway, this is useless. And he buys some time, he takes them into the barn or something, and then this might be too dark for Doctor Who, and he sets fire to the barn and they all die. He sacrifices himself, and it's more of an unexpected and like bigger and more unexpected way to end it, I would say, rather than just the most cliche I'll hold him off for 5 seconds and then get shot.
No offense, but I really don't like that.
You don't like that? I mean,
that seems even more cliched and boring to me. That just seems like it's devolving to that just seems like it turns it into, rather than a quiet scene of like a normal, like him talking to his brother and to these people and trying to see reason with them, and then they don't see it and they just kill him.
Yeah.
And he just ends up another dead person. It turns it into an action movie scene where he's just like,
right.
And then I took down 6 horse riders by setting a barn on fire.
I get what you mean. There is something to it being quiet, but I can't get over just the unoriginalness of it, and B, they are odd horses. He held them off for maybe 2 minutes. I don't think they would have actually gotten away. I forgot to mention that part earlier. That didn't really work for me.
Well, the thing is though that the goal of the people was to wipe out the Muslims in India and drive them into Pakistan, and also to prevent the marriage of a Hindu and a Muslim.
Mm-hmm. Oh, so you're saying they got what they wanted?
I think the point was they weren't necessarily going to pursue them into Pakistan, and so they just needed to run across. They needed to run deeper into Pakistan, and then essentially the horsemen there's no reason for them to keep pushing on.
Well, if there's no reason for them to, I guess there's no reason for them to stay either. But if there's no reason for them to keep pushing on, then did they have to run? Like, because they would have been safe, maybe? I don't know. Probably not. I probably would flee my country too if that happened to me, regardless if I was safe or not.
Yeah, I think the point is they were in danger where they were, but they were not necessarily going to be. The whole point of it was the partition was they were trying to put all the Muslims into their own country. Once they're in their own country, they would probably try and chase after her, but probably wouldn't go that far.
Yeah.
And they were also they were heading into a forest where it's difficult where a horseman doesn't really have an advantage, because horses don't move faster in forests than people do.
They don't. I don't know. I really would have rathered something more clever. Not even in a clever twist to get them out of it, because I agree they kind of, they can't get him out of it, but something more original or imaginative than that. It's not, I guess it's not nearly as big of a pet peeve for you, that sort of an ending, but yeah, it's on my list. It's on my top 5 probably
I feel like the cleverness was primarily the clever twist part of it was used up halfway through with the reveal that the demons were actually sort of peaceful people who were coming to comfort people as they died, and that the holy man was actually killed by Manish.
What do you think of, and this is actually not a criticism inherently, what do you think of that they didn't actually do anything? Like, if they had immediately left, the Doctor and crew, then history would have unfolded the same way. They didn't actually have to interfere like they chose to.
I think that I don't have an issue with that, because one of my for me, my two of my favorite first Doctor Who story. One of them is the Massacre, which essentially comes down to a terrible historical event is about to happen, and the characters don't really do anything to provoke it into happening. They don't really do anything to prevent it happening. There's nothing they can do about it. It's just history that they've got caught up in the middle in. And there's a number of First Doctor stories that sort of move like that, where it's just about being caught up in this terrible place, and there's nothing the Doctor can do. And I think this episode was going for a similar vibe, and I think it worked well. Because it wasn't, with Rosa, it was a case of they were actively working to keep history on the same track. Whereas here it was more a case of they were initially thought there was sort of, the demons were a reason for them to stay. But after that it sort of becomes there's not really anything they can do because they're trapped by the fact that history has to happen the way it happens or Yaz won't exist. So it just becomes a matter of surviving and of trying to sort of help them find their sort of help make that last day better for them.
I like that. I don't even know how intentional it was, but I find myself wishing that they had addressed that. Like, 'cause I feel like that's kind of a nice bit of irony that they didn't really wind up doing anything, and if they had left, then it actually would have turned out okay. Well, Prem would still die.
Actually, it wouldn't have.
Okay.
Because I think that because they wouldn't have gotten married.
I thought about that. Like,
or they could have.
thing.
Well, perhaps they would have gotten married, but
Yeah.
it's possible they would have just been like, we'll get married without anyone to oversee the ceremony. But the Doctor did oversee it.
Yeah, I thought about that. That's kind of like the one thing that they did. And then the Doctor had the speech, and she did my number 2 pet peeve, which is talk about the power of love. It didn't save the day, which is the full pet peeve, but that speech was so sappy, and I saw people praising the speech, and I was like, this is my least favorite speech since the Reigns of Akkad.
I felt like the speech was a mixed bag, where there were bits of it that I really liked, but there were bits of it just felt like the writer was just like, I'm gonna write Jodie Whittaker a good speech, and they were sort of just like reaching for things for her to say.
Mm-hmm.
Like when she suddenly starts talking about like she's just like love, and then just like it's like hope.
It's like hope, exactly.
I was just like, this speech can be about love or it can be about hope. Like it cannot be about both. There's no point to a lot of the speech.
Mm-hmm.
The thing is, I think that there's a stronger version of the speech where you just rewrite it just a little tiny bit and just have it focus on the power of love, but not in the sense of like love is powerful enough to destroy like Dalek fleets, but in the sense of love as an act of like sort of like even though the whole world is against them,
mm-hmm.
continuing to stand where they're standing.
Yeah.
And so basically less Rings of Akkad and more The Doctor Falls, which has my favorite Doctor Who speech ever, I think, in it, which is the who I am is where I stand is where I fall. Where it's like, it doesn't matter if you win, the point is that you stand in the right place and you fight for what matters. And I think if the speech had been more like that, it would have been amazing. And it just missed it by the tiniest bit.
So when you were citing the lines from The Doctor Falls, you didn't even, give it any theatrics, and I still got goosebumps just remembering that moment. Yes. And that's the first time I've gotten goosebumps this entire season.
Yeah. Ouch.
Yeah.
Yeah. The thing is that this episode is like, I thought it was very good. I may be slightly overrating it by comparison to the episodes around it, I'll admit.
Mm-hmm.
But at the moment, my initial reaction was, I was like, this is easily the best Doctor Who has been under Chibnall.
I'm getting a bit of a Harry Potter phenomenon where I went online to see the reactions of it, assuming that everyone in the world thinks like me and that my opinion is the only one. And then I saw the actually uniformly positive takes, and so that also that caused something to kind of double down on it. So I might be a little bit too harsh on it.
Yeah,
I can meet you there.
Well, the funny thing is, last night you messaged me and you were just like, "What did you think? I need to know. I need to know right now." And I said that I thought it was the best Doctor Who episode so far this series. And you were just like, "Well, we'll have an interesting discussion then." I couldn't help but feel, because I've noticed that last week and the week before, the Reddits and various different websites were drifting more negative, I was just like, okay, so Jaden and the rest of the internet hated that episode. And this is going to be one of those cases where I am like the lone defender of a great work of art. Like when I see people saying that Eaters of Light was bad, and I'm just like, no.
Eaters of Light was
it was
good.
not.
That was very good.
Eaters of Light was amazing. Yeah. I will say Eaters of Light was better than this episode, and I gave it a 9, so there's some variance in my 9s. Well, maybe I gave Eaters of Light a 10. That's possible. But I don't think so. But then I went online, I was just like, oh, everyone agrees with me and not with Jaden. That's a nice experience, because usually it's everyone on the internet agrees with Jaden, and I'm sort of like the loner person with my opinion.
Well, the interesting thing about the Reddit specifically was the actual threads dedicated to the episode were very positive, but I felt like the people who dissented were feeling left out, and so the actual posts on both subreddits were pretty negative.
I did see some of that. Right. But I feel like that's a lot of the time. I've noticed that in general, that people, like, I see lots of people, like, in the threads just being like, oh, I like, the people who make their own threads, I've seen lots of threads where people are just like, Clara was the worst companion ever. And they're just like, this is a controversial opinion, but I think Clara sucks. And I'm just like, no, you're like the 12th person to have made a stupid thread about that this week. Yeah. I'm tired of hearing people complain about Clara, and I don't even like Series 7 Clara. Like, I'm just so done of hearing about that. But I feel like it's a similar case where it's just people are just looking for... the people who are negative are the people who are more likely to be looking for attention, and so will put their things outside. I don't think it's a case of them feeling left out. Yeah. I think it's a case of people are looking for attention.
They want the validation. It's probably it's probably better to judge based on the actual specific episode threads than... Yeah. Yeah. And those were very positive.
Yeah. In general, I'm sorry, like, I get that opinions vary, and it's interesting to actually have an episode where we actually disagree, as opposed to an episode where we're just nitpicking, like, and our final scores have less than 2 points difference. But yeah, for me, this episode was I genuinely liked it. I really did, and. Oh, to just go on to one point before I forget it, because I complained earlier about the using the pop song over the Doctor Who credits.
Yeah.
And I really hated that, but using the traditional Indian-sounding version of a Doctor Who theme over the end credits was a stroke of genius, and I really liked that, because it's still the Doctor Who theme, right? But it's just adapted to a different... adapted to the story, and I felt like that worked well, and I would like to see more like that and less putting pop songs over Doctor Who.
Right. I thought that worked, and I thought the music in general was much better.
Yes, that's the other thing, yeah. Thank you for reminding me of the positive talking points that I forgot. This episode, because the previous weeks I was complaining, I was just like, Murray Gold was a musical, like, genius most of the time. Occasionally his music could get a bit too much. I felt often during the comedy scenes it would get a bit too much, but with so far this season, the music has just been forgettable. Whereas this episode, the music had a distinctive character to it. It really felt like it was carrying the story. It felt like it was suited to the setting. And I really hope that the music for the rest of this season fits more in that style than in the style we've gotten so far, because I really like the music for this episode.
I didn't fully love it, like I complained about the psycho strings at the beginning, but it was actually used, which is a positive. And I did like the Indian feel to a lot of it, and I thought the closing credits, it was a really good idea to do that. Because it really wasn't that much of a Doctor Who feeling episode. I actually think it would have been more jarring to have the Doctor Who theme. Yeah.
That's fair, actually.
Yeah, I mean, as I said, I like that it's being used at all,
Yes.
And I like that it was different. I mean, yeah, I like that it was just different at all, really, from the wallpaper music, as you've been calling it in the past.
Yeah.
So that's a positive.
Yes. A positive we agree on.
We can agree on that. I am struggling to find other things that I like uniformly liked about it. Like all my other kind of compliments are tied to a negative. I continue to really like the set and the look of the show. The it really it felt like it was Lahore or the Punjab. I don't know exactly. Did they miss their location in the TARDIS? Because I thought they said they were going to Lahore, and that didn't look like Lahore unless it wasn't a city.
I think they missed it by a bit, because I think she said that she ran to Lahore after that.
Okay. But yeah, so I like the look. I like the sets. The barn was great. Felt lived in and real. So there's some more. There's some more nuggets. There's some more.
Yeah. Well, I think it was because they were traveling. They were using the telepathic circuits to follow the watch back along its past. Mm-hmm. And so I think Yaz thought that at that time her grandmother would be in Lahore, and she was wrong about where her grandmother was because she didn't know that much about her.
Yeah, that's right. That's what it was.
That was a bit of the episode that I think worked well for Yaz as a character, is her sort of like discovering that her grandmother wasn't the person she thought she was, and like her reactions to discovering that she loved someone else before her grandfather, and trying to cope with discovering that a lot of what she'd thought about this woman was actually a lie. When there was that scene where she was talking to Graham, I think worked really well. I thought it was probably the strongest conversation in the episode. And it's the first time they've actually talked.
Yeah, I mean, that's the closest approaching like character development that I got, but I didn't really get anything out of, oh, her grandmother was lying. You reminded me of a specific moment in the opening scene, which I was like, oh God, oh no, which was when she gives Yaz the watch, and her dad offers to clean it up, and she's like, no, it can never be cleaned up, and they ask why, and she's like, I don't want to talk about it anymore. And that just felt amateur.
I think it's like, it was a little drastic of a shift, but I felt like it was somewhat believable in that this is a person who's sort of been hiding a lot about their past, but they still want to pass things on. I don't know.
I feel like the idea of, she wants to pass the watch on, but also doesn't want to talk about it, is perfectly believable. But the way that scene unfolded just felt very, I'm just going to say amateur again. Like, it might be partly the delivery or like the emoting in the scene itself, but I involuntarily chuckled when she was like, I don't want to talk about it. But I do like the music, and I like the sets, and I'm trying. I like Jodie Whittaker, although this I think was her weakest episode. I like Graham. I'm struggling, and I'm trying to. I'm my final number is gonna be any one of like 3 or 4. I might just pull a Jodie Whittaker from last week and tell you to pick a number.
Yeah. So the other thing that I'm going to say that I liked was, I liked that again we saw the Doctor actually building something and doing science, even if it was like not somewhat nonsensical science. Rather than just pointing the sonic at something and working out what it was. To me, that appeals to me much more than just like the pretty standard, like the Doctor points a sonic screwdriver at something, squints at it as if it's got some kind of panel on it that gives her information when it doesn't. That's actually the one thing I did like better about the sonic sunglasses, to be mildly blasphemous here, is that it's just like, I get where he's reading the information from.
Yeah. Isn't it a telepathic interface or something on the sonic?
Yeah, it's a telepathic interface, I guess, but it's like, Is it though?
I don't know.
I don't know.
Sounds like something.
It sounds like something, but it just seems odd to me.
I
Whereas
agree. There's been sonic overuse, and this episode didn't have that. So there's another thing. Slowly racking it up. Like when I first watched the episode, and I was thinking I was going to give it a 3 or 4. I thought that contraption she made didn't do anything, and then when I rewatched it, I was like, oh yeah, she did go back to that contraption. So
yeah. So she built the contraption to sort of break down the matter and analyze it.
Yeah, and that was actually a good hint of like how dense it was. There's bits of everything in there. That was a good detail, and then when you find out it's the remnants of their world, that makes sense. I'm slowly working myself back up to above 500, above 5 right now on my score.
Yeah, I just don't. For me, I'm like, I can get you being like, this wasn't an episode that appealed to me personally. I don't get why you'd give it a score that low, because that seems to be a score reserved for things that are objectively awful, and I just don't think this is. I don't think this is anywhere near objectively awful.
I think where we're really fundamentally different here is, to me, this is confirmation that the season's never going to pick up, that if this is better, that this isn't going to be enough. And for you, this is more of a sign of this is a change for the positive, and we're on the upward swing. Yeah. And so what I've been thinking about is retroactively downgrading a lot of my grades, because a lot of it has been, this, I like where they're going. Well, we'll see where they're going.
Well, the thing for me is that it's not so much that I think this show's on the upswing, but that it proves that the show still can do. For me, it still proves that the show can do good episodes like that. I will like. Whereas my concern before this was, I was just like, are all of the guest episodes going to have the same like same-ish, nothing bland Chibnall vibe? And to me, this didn't. So I'm hopeful that this episode is. I think that the next 2 weeks sound really promising to me.
Yeah, I mean, as I said, my favorite part of the episode was the preview for next week. Next week looks good.
Yeah.
I don't know if I said it when I was on my soapbox, but I think Chibnall's hands are all over this episode. So I would disagree that this didn't have the same bland feel. It still feels very, very dull and bland.
Yeah. Well, it's the first episode that wasn't that he had no writing credit on.
I suspect that's not entirely.
I suspect. I mean, he's the head writer, so every episode is going to have some involvement from him. I just think we can assume that he was much less involved with this than he was with Rosa, for example.
Yeah. He probably didn't write any of the speeches. I think in Rosa he wrote a couple of the speeches, so he got speech credit. But I think that I was also I'm going back to I was an idiot a few weeks ago when I was like, yeah, just give another writer these characters and they'll be fine. I
think this is one of those cases of the problem is you need to give it to another writer who's willing to essentially do the head writer's work of working out how these characters function. And a guest writer can't really do that. They don't have the liberty to completely reinterpret Yaz or Ryan or Graham to make them different characters. And Graham, I think, is working, but just throwing him in there to be complete.
Yeah, it's...
The funny thing is, when we were discussing it before and I was saying about the other media being an interesting question, is I think that's where we're going to get that happening. That's where that tends to happen, is stuff like comics and Big Finish coming in with a completely different take on a companion or a doctor and making them into a much more in-depth character. But I can't say I've ever really seen it happen with guest writer episodes on a TV show, like on the TV show of Doctor Who itself.
Those don't count, though. Big Finish half counts.
Well, whether they count or not, I think that they count. I think that the single most canon thing is those 60s Doctor Who newspaper strips where he fires a ray gun at things is literally called Doctor Who. Doctor abbreviated as DR period, and travels with his 2 grandchildren, John and Gillian. That's the peak of Doctor Who canon. Everything else
those
just kind
count.
of revolves around that. Those definitely count. We're not going to debate that.
Yeah, anything that was written after Watergate doesn't count unless it's in the
exactly.
show.
Yeah. But what I'm saying is that those sort of adjacent, because they're kind of like on the edges of Doctor Who, that's where people are able to sneak in and be like, I'm going to reinterpret this character and give them more depth, or make them act differently, or tweak them a bit, because they're out of the main area and they're willing to take risks. I think that's where that tends to happen. Whereas I don't think it tends to happen as much in the show.
And because you have like a debate, a gray area on how canon those things are, you have the ability to somewhat rewrite, someone like Ryan into having a personality,
Yeah, and because you don't have to deal with Chosen Cole not delivering your lines right.
Yeah, I think I
feel like I'm being really mean to him. I feel like I'm being really mean. I feel really bad every time I say something about him, but he's just not a very good actor.
The longer this season goes on, the more I think you're right that he was supposed to be like 14, because he's playing a 14-year-old kind of well.
Yeah.
But this episode was particularly bad with him either asking questions or pointing out the thing that just happened on the screen. And that's been a Chibnall thing. That's kind of one of the things I'm talking about when Chibnall has his hands on this episode.
With this episode, for me, what I feel like is it feels like the writer, it feels like he really wanted to write a story revolving around Yaz's family. He gave Graham some good stuff to do, and then he was just like, oh, Ryan, there's a third person in the TARDIS. I have to give them something to do.
Yeah.
Which is a problem that you often run into in Doctor Who scripts when you have a larger TARDIS team, is inevitably, especially with guest writers, they're not able to give everybody something to do because you can only find space for so many characters in your story, and there was no space for Ryan to be in this story. So all he could do was give him basic lines. I think he should have tried a bit harder to find a better place for Ryan to fit in. But I think also...
Yeah.
I think that this TARDIS team it's just too big.
It's too big.
Yeah. And it's too... there's nothing... in order to make a TARDIS team that big, I think one of the characters would need to be a character along the lines of, River or Nardole, where they're not a conventional companion, and they're more Doctor-like and more odd, because it's easy to write lines for someone like River or Nardole, because you can't just fit them into a generic companion slot.
Right. I think it's really weird that they're focusing 2 episodes now on Yaz when she seems like the third wheel, and that it feels like Ryan and Graham are supposed to be the main companions with Yaz on the side.
Well, the thing is, for me, I feel like until this episode, she has had the least to do. Even in the Spiders episode where we saw her family, there were far more scenes focusing on Graham's grief or on Ryan talking about receiving the letter from his dad than there were directly focusing on Yaz. It was just her flat just seemed to be the setting for things happening. And then her mother's work. It still felt like Yaz was the third wheel. So this is the first episode where she's taken center stage, and I think that she works much better as a companion than Ryan does. So if it was up to me, I would say that they should probably find a way to write Ryan out. Or they need. I think in some way they need to majorly rework how this TARDIS team dynamic is working, though. Well, okay, I'm just gonna say this as well. So the last time Doctor Who had 3 companions on a regular basis was the beginning of the Peter Davison era, and they worked out that it wasn't working really early on. They worked out that they were just there's no conceivable way we can write enough space for 3 companions. And this was when every story was 4 episodes, pretty much. There was 1 2-episode story, but they were all 4 half-hour episodes, so that's twice as long as Doctor Who is right now. And they couldn't find something for every companion to do. And they'd worked out that they decided that in the last episode of the season that they would kill off one of the companions, and they were just trying to work out who they were going to kill off. And I think this is going to be a similar situation where it just doesn't work. You just can't have that many companions anymore. It hasn't worked since like the 1960s when the show was very different. The show was a lot longer. And even then, I'd argue that in the early 60s Doctor Who stuff, Susan ends up coming off really badly. So it's debatable whether it worked even then, and that's the closest it's come to working.
Well, if I were to restructure this season, I would put Yaz on Earth more often. I would probably say arachnids and this episode are like the only two where she's really a companion with them, and then the most of the other ones are just Ryan and Graham, and then occasionally they add her on for a different one.
I
kind of like Mickey, like in season 1.
I think that would work really well, especially if you emphasize. I think the key thing to making Yaz work as a character at this point is she's a police officer, and she should act like a police officer.
Yeah.
And she doesn't. That's never factored into her character at all, and that's the easiest way to write her, is to write her having a very police officer-like analytical response, like crime-solving response to the situations, and she never does. It just seems like a fact about her is like, oh, she's a police officer, when it should be something that helps define her as a character and who she is. And I think what would have worked really well as a dynamic, just going from the concept, is Ryan and Graham traveling with the Doctor and their family dynamic, and then Yaz, who they sort of team up with when they're back on Earth as like the police officer contact. And then she calls them in for arachnids or something like that. And then this episode...
calling them in for arachnids would be great. Because she's on the case for something.
It's just like she's on the case, and she's a police officer who knows the Doctor, has her phone number, calls her when odd things are happening. Kind of making her more of a Brigadier or Vastra type character. And then this could be one episode where we would open with she's talking to the Doctor about like, I would like to travel back and find out about my grandmother. And she's not necessarily an ongoing companion. She just wants to travel back and find out this one thing. I think that would work much better, even though I think I think she's much stronger than Ryan as a character. I don't think Ryan has anything that would make him work as a supporting character, whereas I think Yaz could work as a supporting character. But I think the TARDIS is just too crowded right now.
I agree. I don't know. I'm very skeptical on Ryan ever being able to work, but if he were ever able to work, it would mean that they cut one of the other characters. Because there's just too many people, and he just does not have nearly enough time.
And to be frank, like even if we're just looking at it from the situation of just from the situation of one of the characters going to be written as generic companion, I would rather there was one character who was written as generic companion than two characters being written as generic companion.
Mm-hmm.
So that at least that way one person gets all of the generic companion lines instead of them being split up across two characters, neither of whom gets anything good to do.
Yeah, and this is just a season-long critique. I'm not specifically attacking. Yeah, the companions don't do anything. They don't challenge the Doctor in a way. Like when I'm thinking of Amy, she challenges Matt Smith on like everything.
I 100% agree.
Yeah, and I feel like that's the most important role of a companion, is to call the Doctor out on stuff or to change her, sometimes him, in a way. And that hasn't happened.
I think that comes down as well to so the problem is that there's a companion dynamic, but there's no tension there. And it's really weird that there's no tension there, because I think this is primarily a problem with the Ghost Monument, and then up through Arachnids, is that this woman essentially abducts them into space and gets them into an alien death race, and their reaction is just like, oh, that's cool. Like they're just like, oh, I guess we're in an alien death race now. That's fun. Like, we don't blame you at all, Doctor. Like, a version of Ghost Monument should have been a really good episode based off the concept. Because what we should have had is, like, the tension building, teams splitting up, like, people racing against each other, sabotaging each other, and then sort of a big confrontation between, say, Yaz and the Doctor, or Graham and the Doctor, or Ryan and the Doctor. Pick one of them, and then someone's on the Doctor's side, someone's against him. Ryan and Graham are sort of fighting. Graham or Ryan blames the Doctor for Grace's death. All of this could be really interesting drama, and Chibnall's just uninterested in writing any interesting drama. He's only he just does not know how to. He doesn't know how to construct characters that have meaningful interactions with each other beyond just to him, Yaz being a police officer is just a bullet point fact about her, rather than something that informs the way she acts. And I think Grace's death is just something that makes Graham sad, rather than something that comes as a source of tension between Graham and Ryan, or Ryan and the Doctor, or Graham and the Doctor. It feels like there should have... The whole point of having companions abducted in the first place surely should have been that they don't trust the Doctor, and that they're trying to get home, and that they're angry at the Doctor for this happening to them. But they aren't, so why not just have them travel willingly with the Doctor from the start?
Yeah. I agree 100%. I'm wondering where I can sign up to have you be the next showrunner.
I'm wondering where I can sign up to be the next showrunner.
I'm not English, so I can't do it.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's and again, it's kind of very basic elements to the show that are not working, and should have started working 3 episodes ago at least.
Yeah, so for me the thing is, I think this episode was really strong, but it would have been stronger with a better person overseeing this era of Doctor Who. That I think that my thing was, I was just maybe Chibnall will be a much better showrunner than he is a writer, and I think he is a better showrunner than he is a writer, in terms of he made a good choice in choosing Jodie Whittaker, things like that. But because of the way the episodes are structured, because of how he's not developing the characters himself, he's not giving the other writers anything to latch onto, anything to work with. So it's just, the other people can't write Yaz if there's no conception of who Yaz is. They can't write Ryan if there's no real conception of who Ryan is. They can't write the 13th Doctor if there's no distinction of what makes the 13th Doctor distinct and different from the other Doctors. And I honestly, I've loved Jodie Whittaker's performance, but I still don't think we've gotten her moments where we really see who she is and how she functions as a Doctor and how she's different from the others. She just feels very generic Doctor.
She almost had that iconic Doctor moment when she was this planet's protected, but then that doesn't really matter anymore because they're not actually coming to kill him. Which I like that twist.
Yeah,
but her closest moment to a iconic moment got sabotaged.
Yes. I think the thing is that they just need to come up with a strong conception of who are all of these people. And I think the issue is that guest writers can't come up with a conception of who are all these people, especially in the way the show is being run right now. If it was super hands off, the way some of the episodes under Stephen Moffat, I feel like Stephen Moffat wasn't doing that much, and the writers could essentially. There were a couple of episodes where I felt like certain people had different takes on the way the 12th Doctor worked than Moffat had, for example. I felt like Matheson had a really distinctive take on Capaldi that didn't necessarily translate it out into how other people wrote him, but still worked. But right now I don't feel like there's necessarily that level of a guest writer can just define how this Doctor is going to act, how the companions are going to act. And they definitely can't define it and have it last more than a week.
Yeah, I don't see long-term change coming anytime soon, and that's kind of the backbone of my argument. So I don't know exactly how much we've gone over on our time
Yes.
because of interruptions, but
Uh,
probably good to go into final thoughts. And
Probably, yeah.
I'm still mulling over my final score. Do you have one?
So, like I said, because of consistency with my previous scores, I gave Rosa an 8 out of 10. I'm gonna maybe be a little low. It's either an 8.5 or a 9, and it depends on whether I'm judging it according to Eaters of Light was a 9, or whether I'm judging it according to Rosa was an 8. So it's at least a full point better than Rosa, but I don't think it's anywhere near the same level as Eaters of Light. But it is.
That sounds like 8.5.
That sounds like an 8.5 to me. So I think I'm leaning towards an 8.5. But in general, this is the best episode so far for me. I think it's a genuinely good episode. I really liked it. There were a couple of weak points with with some of the acting was a bit dodgy. There were some of the lines were still a little telly, and I think that comes from the writer being a playwright and being used to if you need to say something is happening on screen you need to say it in dialogue because you can't necessarily rely on visuals to get something across on the stage. But overall, I would say that this is the best episode so far. But I'm just not confident in this era of Doctor Who because I don't think even having just good episodes like this is going to be enough to make the era or the series as a whole work. I think we're going to need Chris Chibnall to step up his game.
Yeah, I don't find that very likely, but hopefully, if he hears this, maybe he's gonna be inspired. If he didn't turn it off after my soapbox. For me, so when I'm glad I rewatched it because I did enjoy it more when I rewatched it. And that saved it from being very low. So I'll get to my number rating later. What I didn't harp on too much more than as much as I wanted to, was that while there were improvements writing and script wise over Chibnall, I really thought there was a marked decrease in the acting job this time. And that was not the case in the Chibnall times. The Chibnall episodes have been very standard, subpar writing, but the actors do it well. And so that's kind of like a unique wild card component to this episode for me, which I can't blame either the writer or Chibnall for. But I feel like I was a little too harsh in my initial thoughts on it. And right now I'm putting it around The Girl Who Lived, which you liked a lot less than this episode, but in that there's good moments to it, but doesn't really work, and I think that there's a lot of the praise it's getting is undeserved or underdeserved. And so I gave The Girl Who Lived a 5, which is, if you've been paying attention, it's one number below pass on my 1 to 10 grade, 6 being a pass. And I think that this one's going to settle in at a 5, with the condition of every other episode other than the pilot is getting half a grade lower than I initially gave it.
That's cheating.
I mean, it seems kind of silly and convoluted, but hear me out, because this episode was this season's chance to convince me that it's on an upward trajectory, and all the benefits of the doubt I have been giving it were not in vain, and it didn't do that in some very key moments. And we've got, what, 4 episodes left? 5 episodes
4
left?
episodes left.
Yeah.
5 if you count the Christmas
left.
special, but I don't think that counts as part of the series itself.
The New Year's special.
Oh yeah, it may have been moved to New Year's, that's true.
Yeah. So, yeah, this episode did nothing to convince me that this season is going to get back on track. The most that I watched last night that convinced me that this season is going to get back on track was the preview to next week's episode. And so for that, it's going to get the first fail of the year. Although retroactively, the Ghost Monument now fails. I think I gave it a 6 and it's at a 5.5. So my rating system is arbitrary and convoluted. But since I reserved the right to change my my grades, I think this makes sense. Putting it at a 5, a step below, but not markedly below the other episodes.
The funny thing is, if you take your Ghost Monument score down that low, then you give it the same score that I initially wanted to give it before you convinced me I was being too unfair.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, I should. That's the one I want to rewatch most right now, actually, because
I wouldn't subject
not even
myself
like
to that.
it's not even like, oh, I like that one a lot, I want to rewatch it. It's what the hell was that episode?
Yeah.
You know, like it's an interesting mess. I think the Ghost Monument, in a way that a lot of episodes this season haven't been. Like, have been uninteresting messes, or just this one, not a mess but uninteresting, if you ask me.
Well, for me, the primarily thing about Ghost Monument is it's not really a mess. That was my thing that I talked about. I was like, it's perfectly structurally sound. It's just like every single choice that it makes in terms of drama and characters is wrong. It had interesting. It's like they make a big point about the water being toxic, and then nobody ever touches the water or is threatened by the water in any way. They make a big point about being a race, and then everyone travels in the same direction. They make a big point about the bots being super deadly sniper bots, and yet they never manage to shoot anybody, and it never feels like anyone's in danger. Like, the Doctor goes to a hill and doesn't immediately see the TARDIS there, and concludes that therefore they're going to die alone on this planet. It's just
you know what? I retroactively concede my argument on that episode in an effort to win the argument on this episode. Because I am that petty.